It is my honor and a pleasure to welcome you to today's CSCSS seminar entitled The Belt and Road Initiative, Communication and Geopolitics in South Asia. I am Dr. Harisur Rahman, and I serve as an associate professor in Media Communication and Journalism program, North-South University. And also I serve as a coordinator of China South Asia Center for Sociocultural Studies. We call it CSCSS. I'm delighted to have Dr. Anis Rahman among us, a faculty member from the University of Washington, Seattle. Dr. Rahman's expertise and insight promise to enlighten us on the profound implications of Belt and Road Initiative, particularly its impact on communication within the dynamic region of South Asia. The CSCSS, under the auspices of South Asian Institute of Policy and Governance and the Department of Political Science and Sociology at North-South University, is proud to organize this event. CSCSS is an interdisciplinary research and academic collaboration focusing on China and South Asia's sociocultural, economic, and geopolitical dynamics. Founded in the wake of a significant partnership between North-South University and U.S University, the center was established in 2020 to address the critical gap in scholarly attention towards the socio-cultural, economic, and geopolitical interactions, identities, and communities within this region. The center's activities are multifaceted, involving externally and internally funded research projects. Currently, we have two research ongoing. So one is like externally funded project is International Logistic Channel in the BCIM economic corridor, and another is cultural heritage of ethnic communities in Bangladesh. As you know, China has many ethnic communities. Like we see from outside that China is very homogeneous country, but it is not. It has more than 50 ethnic minority communities, and they have a lot of experience in doing research, sociocultural research, and we are also doing the same in Bangladesh, like ethnic community mapping. Furthermore, CSCSS is preparing for its inaugural international conference in December 2024, entitled China, South Asia, Civilization and Connectivity, History and Contemporary Issues, which promises to be a landmark event in sociocultural studies. Regarding the structure of today's program, Dr. Rahman will grace us with a 20-minute presentation, followed by our esteemed panelists, who will each offer 10 minutes of reflection on this discourse. Subsequently, we'll open the floor for a question and answer session, anticipated to last approximately 20 minutes. Now, to talk about our distinguished speaker today, I'm honored to introduce you to Dr. Anis Rahman, our keynote speaker for today's CSCSS seminar. Dr. Rahman serves as an assistant teaching professor in the Department of Communication at the University of Washington, Seattle, bringing with him a wealth of knowledge and expertise in the field of communication. Holding a PhD in communication from Simon Fraser University, and an MA in television journalism from Goldsmiths, University of London, awarded the prestigious Chevening Award, Dr. Rahman has dedicated his academic career to exploring the cultural impact of information technology and the complex geopolitics of the internet. His work critically examines the interplay between media, politics, and culture, offering profound insights into the dynamics of digital activism, policy reform, and the political economy of media and journalism. Thank you for your presence and participation. Let's look forward to a session of stimulating discourse. Please join me in warmly welcoming Dr. Anis Rahman to our seminar. I now invite Dr. Rahman to share his insights. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Harisur Rahman, for a very generous introduction. I'm blessed with the presence of Dr. Sheikh Tawfique M and Dr. Mohammed Nuruzzaman here, and a vast talent that is in this room is going to unfold in the next couple of decades. I mean, the students in this classroom. So thank you for joining us. So we are at a very critical juncture in which we are seeing increasing global conflicts and often represented and reflected in media discourses. So media, in a sense, represent national interest, but in that way, they reproduces national and international biases of their geopolitical alliance. So I'm going to show how it is done in the case of Belt and Road Initiative, in how it is being played out in the South Asian countries, most notably in Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh. But I also acknowledge that other players such as Nepal and Sri Lanka are important partners of the Belt and Road Initiative. So the scope of this work is limited by 20 minutes in this presentation, but I would invite you to read my work, which I have already published with Professor Yuji Zhao. She is a humanities research professor at Tsinghua University, my former PhD supervisor at Simon Fraser University, currently a professor at Tsinghua University, who I co-authored a book chapter with. So I have a digital copy available in academia.edu. So you are welcome to download that and read that in detail. So here I'll visualize some of the elements that is not in that chapter, such as for some of the samples of news representation of the Belt and Road initiatives and the discussion surrounding that. So my interest in the Belt and Road Initiative was sparked when I was nearing to finish my PhD at Simon Fraser University from a president's lecture by Professor Yuji Zhao, when I started to notice that South Asian media has a very divergent view of the Belt and Road initiatives. So for example, as you see in these pictures, media from India is largely negative about Belt and Road Initiative, whereas media in Pakistan and Bangladesh are largely positive. It's not that Pakistan and Bangladesh are collaborating together to present a positive China image, but it is happening in their own right without any conspiracy. So I was curious that why media is reproducing the government's narrative. You can see the similar narrative is presented by ministers, by research reports, by academics who have funding from the government sources. So I was curious to understand the geopolitics of this divergent media reaction to Belt and Road Initiative in South Asia. And then I realized its scope is much more broader. It is a global nature to present Belt and Road in a certain way in which India largely reproduces North American, especially Anglo-European media representation of China. So I'm going to show you some elements of that in my presentation. Again, you are welcome to look at our publications. Here is the publication, which is the source of my presentation today. But again, it doesn't have the visuals that I have in my PowerPoint here. If you'd like to reach out to me with the PowerPoints, I have my email address mentioned here. Please feel free to contact me. And if you'd like to be engaged with further research, I can help you with mentoring and guiding you to right directions. I'll be happy to have further conversation. So this book came out just at the end of 2023, and the book chapter is available in academia.edu. But the book has also chapters about media geopolitics in Brazil. I wrote also another chapter about South Asian cultural industry, how United States plays a big role in redefining the digital platforms, greatly speaking in the case of Indian media ecosystem, and how it impacts us in this case. So my presentation, although I'll be pressed towards the end, probably to rush it to end, so we can listen from the esteemed discussants. So I have divided into 5 segments in which I want to give you, I have students in mind, and I know that this is a very basic overview for the professors, experts of China studies here, and international studies, as well as South Asia studies. So my audience is not them. My presentation is at a very basic level. My audience is you, the students, who I want you to be interested more in international communication and geopolitics. So I'll give a very basic historical overview, but keep in mind that there are people in this room right now who are far more knowledgeable about this topic, and you can take courses with them to learn more about their work, about the knowledge of China. So I'll talk a little bit about the theoretical framework, and then I'll give you examples of how Western media presents the Belt and Road and how it is very similar to the way India presents and talks about Belt and Road, and how other countries such as Bangladesh and Pakistan are slightly different. And I'll explain you geopolitical explanation. I'll provide some of them examples that why that might be the case. So I draw my work, I draw inspiration from world system theory. That is my primary fascination, world system theory, but I see a good connection between Sinocentric globalization studies as well as what we understand recently from Daniel Vukovic's work, Sinological Orientalism, a view about China, which is largely produced from outside China, about China, presenting it through Western lens. So that is called Sinological Orientalism. It's an extension of Edward Said's work on Orientalism, in which the East is presented as Oriental, underdeveloped, barbaric, exotic, as well as someone who needs rescuing, right? So China is often presented that way, both in American media, European media, as well as in Indian media, and I'll give you some examples. So I present this, that there is a soft power contestation going on in which the Western media alliances, in which they speak the same languages, they hold an upper hand in presenting and convincing people as their version of truth. Okay, so that's a form of soft power. Soft power is the ability to attract someone to do something and believe in something without coercion. And hard power is when you apply coercion, such as army, sanctions, financial embargo, and so on. So I want to show that how media work as a form of soft power against China, and how China tried to overcome with collaboration as well as cooperation with the countries in the global south. Okay, so in order to make those arguments, I look at the negative responses in global and regional media, and I'm expanding that work to Middle East and later to Africa and Latin America. And I'm also looking at how there are alternative discourses, a different view of reality. They may exist, and you can look no further than media representation in Bangladesh. But the point I also want to argue that might not be absolute truth the way you see China and Belt and Road in Bangladeshi media, because it is largely driven by finance-driven journalism, whereas Indian media representation is driven by their nationalistic or nationalism-driven journalism, as well as their geopolitical alliance in their positioning in Quad, Quadruple Security Dialogue, in which they are partner with United States. So I draw a critical discourse analysis in this work, and I bring in geopolitical historical facts and debates. And I have looked into 100+ online accessible reports, largely emerging from Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, but also, of course, some of the Western representative media work. So with that, I move on to, I'll give you the key argument right here. So what is the key takeaway from my presentation? If you are looking for just one statement, which is here, that South Asia is a very particularly contested zone for the Belt and Road to succeed, not only because of Indian rejection of the Belt and Road, but also due to pre-existing ethnic and territorial conflicts resulting from British colonial intervention. And I'll not have enough time to talk about this part, but it is written in the book chapter. Please feel free to read that. An ongoing geopolitical synergy that the United States and Indian alliance seek to leverage against China, right, or contain China rise. The media representation, and here's the main argument where I kind of extend the discussion from area studies or international studies scholars, is that I apply that into media world, in which I argue that the media representation around the Belt and Road, actually it follows that geopolitical fault line. Okay, there is no absolute neutrality or certainty or truth, but only their geopolitical biases that is reflected, unwittingly given out in their media representation. So that is my key argument. But of course, there are other ways to understand that kind of geopolitics. For example, you can look into COVID-19 vaccine diplomacy as a lens to understand that geopolitics. But I look at the media representation. So why does it contribute? By understanding this from local point of view or regional perspective, as well as from global contrast, we can contest and appreciate, and we can draw parallel to the new vectors of global power shifts and the new possibilities for communication and information world order. So that's a struggle unfolding since non-aligned movement with the new world information communication order movement, which did not really materialize fully, but we see elements of that are coming out and being occasionally speaking through the media headlines. So I want to now first give you a very brief view of the old Silk Road and how it ties to the world system and how China tried to evoke that sentiment and history into their cultural nostalgia to give a foundation to the modern day Belt and Road Initiative. So there are many, many maps and many, many historical documents. But if you want to just look at three key representative maps that explains the old Silk Road, the first one on the top is that actually shows you here the old Silk Road. And then you have the old world system parallel to that is very similar. You see the trade routes, and then there is from 14th century to 18th century world system. Okay, so what this map tells us. But first of all, the old Silk Road is a network interlinking trade routes across Eurasian trading various goods and different countries, right? So this global trade is not new, it's old, and it predates the rise of United States and their Anglo-European alliance, or what we know as Washington Consensus. So the 13th century world system, it contributed for India and China a lot. And the major global trade routes, they center around China and bypasses India. It is because India and China were two largest economies in the world. And as Professor Yuji Zhao and I argue, that this circumglobal system of world trade that existed centuries ago, long before the current period of economic globalization, which was centered around India and China, this perspective requires a paradigm shift for those who hold fast to present conventional wisdom that the economic globalization, the capitalist one of modern time, it started with European Renaissance. It is untrue. It existed before. It has European Renaissance came after that world system started to conflict with the imperial powers. Okay, so this helps us to rethink about human history, the ground zero of civilization, that it is a result of the integrative spread of not only Western idea, but within global South to South ideas that existed before, including their trades, ideas, technologies, cultures, and capital to all corners of the world. So once we start to understand from Belt and Road from that historic perspective, the China's Belt and Road in modern times start to make sense that China is trying to regain its #1 position that it was in 14th century. Okay, it was much richer than Europe, all European GDPs combined, right? And India was right next to it before it got, let's say, colonized by first East India Company, then the British Empire. So of the old agrarian, commercial, non-capitalist innovations, 4 ancient innovations, for example, papermaking, printing, compass, they're all about communication and transport. So it tells us how communication is a central aspect of the global trade as well as the new Silk Road, whether we name it Belt and Road or not. Belt and Road Initiative, and here is a key takeaway, is basically a branding and signature exercise. There are many agreements that existed before Belt and Road that are very similar to Belt and Road, and there will be many other trades that will not have the name Belt and Road, but they have similar principle in which China is trying to solve its overcapacity problem as well as its underspending problem, right? So in doing that, China is trying to create infrastructures of various kinds. That's the spirit of Belt and Road. So it did exist before, especially China's military wealth was there. For example, Admiral Cheng, his voice from 1405 to 1432, Southeast Asia and East Africa started almost century before that Columbus and his ships were much larger. Right, and here are, again, the visualization of that. You see here, the one of the ships from the armada of Admiral Cheng He, and then you see in contrast in contrast, you have, sorry, I think I fast forward. Here you have the picture of one of the ships from Columbus's voyage to the west. So what does it tell us? China had the ability to colonize Africa if it wanted, but it did not, because it is not imperial in the same way Europe was, settler colonial. It is not like that, right? It has endocolonization nature in which it expanded to its neighbor to become modern day China, but not necessarily by conquering far culture or far apart lands or their wealths. So for understanding that, we need to look into, I would invite you to look into the work of various scholars, including Janet Abu-Lagut's work, as well as especially Andre Gunder Frank work, The Reorient. But more recently, if you want to understand how China ascended to global power in recent century, I would highly recommend the work of Giovanni Arrighi. Okay, Giovanni Arrighi argues the winner of war and terror is actually China, and the United States is the ultimate loser, because $4 trillion worth of investment was made to that war that only profited and made richer only select few of the United States, but at the expense of education, health, and money for infrastructure within the United States. Right, so that argument can be contested and debated, but that is the one of the key takeaways, how China ascended not necessarily by force, but in absence of other power retreating. But be mindful that United States is still largest economy, and one of the arguments that we hear that the United States is demising and declining, it may be true, but China doesn't need to, or China doesn't want to be the global hegemony or the number one power in the world, because it comes with a lot of military responsibility, which is rather a loss for your country. And I had this joke I heard from a professor from Communication University of China. China is not that stupid to be number one. Okay, because it comes with a lots of cost, opportunity cost, that you don't need to reproduce similar way of thinking. Now, China and America has problems, but China and India, they actually get along pretty well until recent century, when McMahon Line divided India and China in a way that they continue fighting for a really long time, right? So you see one of the spirit that occasionally comes out in movie production like that, Kung Fu Yoga, although you can call it government propaganda, but it's fairly entertaining, and it's cultural representative of both cultures, a bonding that existed long before European colonization, and it's likely to come back in future if they can resolve their border disagreements and their geopolitical extension to the West. So the point I want to now say, then why we vilify China in the way we see in Indian media or Western media, that often lacks historical substance, that often start looking at the Belt and Road Initiative as a ground zero, as if there was no China before 18th century, right? So it is because one of the explanation, among many other explanations, is sinological Orientalism, in which actually China is seen as inherently evil. And that you can see from America's portrayal of Japan right before the Second World War. Although Japan is one of the biggest trading partner and ally of the Quad with the United States, but they had similar portrayal of Japan in 1938 to 42, prepared the mindset of American people for accepting the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki eventually. So from YOLO peril to China steals to Chinese virus, there is no shortage of panic-inducing xenophobia and China bashing against China's reemergence to global prominence. The imperative of China bashing, okay, often go hand in hand with Orientalist view towards China, in which Daniel Vukovich, you see the book cover page here, theorized the sinological Orientalism. In this view, sinological Orientalist view, China is seen, constructed, and interpreted as the other, right? There is us, and then there is other, like the Middle East is other to United States, right? In which the other that must become the same as the West to become acceptable. So if China doesn't have a two-party monopoly of election, then it is not as good as United States democracy. right? So the expectation of privilege that China has to be like United States, and it is not, therefore they are lesser worthy of respect, right? In this sinological Orientalist view, China is also contrasted against the West, which is presented or understood as open, liberal, modern, free, whereas China is the opposite, closed, illiberal, and authoritarian. In sinological Orientalism, it widely affects our cultural thinking, our knowledge production, and our media representation of China from outside, mostly dominated by the Western and non-Western partner, and often within China. All right, although this sinological Orientalism as a theory or analytical methodological tool is not adequate, you have to understand China from also outside of that. I acknowledge that. So from that, now let's see if are there elements of sinological Orientalism in South Asian media representation. Okay, so this is where we need to understand that the new Silk Road is actually China's, again, it is trying to solve its overcapacity problem, as well as it's not necessarily a global hegemony blueprint or an evil ploy to take over the world against the United States, but it's an effort to solve their overcapacity problem. Okay, and that is Walden Bello, a Filipino Marxist scholar's work, clarified that. And you also see Wallerstein also pointed out that the Western economic model is crisis prone, and China suffered that in the 2007 crisis, but it was resilient enough to stand up and realize that it needs to disintegrate from the capitalist system. It needs to have its own state mobilized capitalist system to secure its own place in future world system. So it's preparing itself for next 70 to 100 years transformation in the global power. And that is from Wallerstein. Immanuel Wallerstein is the most notable world system theorist scholar side by side Giovanni Arrighi and Andre Gunder Frank. So the South Asian part is fairly well understood. You see, there are 6 economic corridors alongside maritime routes, okay, which are, you can see somewhat presented by dots, but the economic belts are mentioned here. And you can also see the China-Pakistan economic corridor as one of the key Belt and Road Initiative, but there is also Bangladesh, China, India, Myanmar economic corridor. And I understand that North-South University is a part of that to understand the logistics part and analyze that as a research partner. And I congratulate North-South University on achieving that position. Right, overcoming all the sinological Orientalist view to really see it for what it is. Okay, so from here, I want to point out that as much as important this China-Pakistan economic corridor and this Myanmar economic corridor, we need to keep in mind the important historical facts that we have been at war for almost a century, right? And in which Indo-Pakistan, Sino-Indian war, it intersects, actually it goes through several borders that has connection to the Belt and Road economic corridors. So that is one of the reasons India always side by its own national interest, in which it sees Belt and Road Initiative as a threat, because it recognizes part of Jammu Kashmir's area that are disputed. It goes through it. That means acknowledging China-Pakistan economic corridor, it means you are actually giving recognition to that part of disputed territory as a part of Pakistan. And that is one of the reasons, valid reasons, why India opposes it, although it maintains heavy trade with China outside the Belt and Road. India also has a very big trade deficit with China, in which it cannot hold an upper hand over China, and that is reflected into its complaint against China, all right, in terms of various goods trading. So that also reflects into its not inferiority complex, but in recognition that China is implementing these Belt and Road initiatives and other business trades, for example, with Bangladesh. It's not here to benefit India, but to take away India's partial regional hegemony over South Asia's neighbor countries. So one of the core areas you see that CPEC is one of the most important one, because it is nearly completed, which started with $46 billion plan, but went up to 62 billion. And by 2022, it has spent almost 65 billion. So it shows kind of over cost run problem with the Belt and Road Initiative that stretches through Gilgit-Baltistan all the way to Gwadar Port, right? So that is China's backup mechanism in the event of there are war in South China Sea and sea traders blocked, right? But this also connects China to Kashgar, to part of Central Asia, and goes all the way to Europe. So now let's look at some of the samples very quickly about the media discourses. So I'll straight go into the negative view and Western media. So no matter how I analyzed it using LexisNexis, Google News Search, and other databases, most of the representation, just simply by reading headline and going on a couple of paragraphs, you can realize it's largely negative. And this negative representation comes with China as a corrupt administration, a one-party administration, fascist administration ruled by one-party dictator person, and so on. It all contrasts against American political system. Okay, so the one that actually you may hear the most is the Belt and Road as a debt trap. So China is forging a debt trap diplomacy to colonize as well as to subdue, to control large economies of global South, right? By providing them infrastructures and money, and when they're unable to pay the loan, then you seize the infrastructure as your, or use that infrastructure in the event of Third World War. This is what United States representation, as well as their military, or let's say strategic fear. And take a look at some of the allegations. Even in after 2023, in recent reports such as the Georgetown Security Studies Review, it kind of thinks that Hambantota Port is an example of debt trap diplomacy, as if it has nothing from the researches that has already been done. Sri Lanka doesn't see it that way. Sri Lankan local media recognizes that this debt trap problem exists, but it's not created by China. Okay, and it recognizes that this poster child representation is largely a myth. It's a Western and Indian creation. Sri Lanka debt to China amounts to only 6% of its GDP, and Sri Lanka owes, in contrast, 27% of GDP to international financial markets and multilateral lenders such as World Bank and IMF. Now you can see what is the bigger problem. And the seizing of the Hambantota port, actually it's never happened. It is one thing to take contract to manage that, another thing to own that and take it over absolutely. These two are different things, but the Western media represent as if it has been completely taken over by China. So this myth was busted by, I would highly recommend you to read the work by John Hopkins professor and Harvard Business School professor, Deborah Brottingham, and you can also see Meg Riedmeyer. They have actually done a thorough analysis of this debt trap allegation against China and looked at this for what it is, that it is a myth. It doesn't exist. So you can see that Indian media continue to represent that India is rejecting it strongly, and it is something that China is failing to convince people to get on board. It is failing itself, and there is largely negative view. But more importantly, it reproduces, you see the evidence here, that Financial Times in India and New York Times, they have very similar language and even similar headline, in which Pakistan, and here it seems a little bit funny, that Pakistan is stupid enough to be colonized, but clever enough to forge alliance with its India's enemy, right? So what it seems like, a Belt and Road is a failing project, but also successful in colonizing, as if it is a Schrodinger cat, both dead and alive at the same time. So you can also see that in contrast to mainstream discourse, within Indian media, there are occasional recognition that Belt and Road is or trade with China is actually an opportunity, and India needs to take a fresh look and benefit from it instead of giving its policymaking power to United States. So there exist, Indian media is a vast ecosystem itself. Some views that mainstream media cannot provide, but there are, just to acknowledge that India is not a monopolar or let's say unipolar view of anti-Chinese, but there are recognition of pro-Chinese initiatives too. So I want to now conclude towards the end that how positive images China is, it kind of produces the same narrative that you hear from the ministers, that you hear from the ambassadors, or hear from many of the research reports too, that it is a mechanism for collaboration, connectivity, and cooperation. Okay, so that is largely reflected in Geo News, very influential, and Dawn as well. You'll see that they are critical, but also largely positive of the Belt and Road Initiative. And this goes on to understand how it is an important necessity to build those infrastructures that Pakistan lacks, in which United States is reluctant to invest, right? So Bangladesh also, that it has about 12 roads, 21 bridges, 27 power projects, about $4+ billion investment, projecting to go at 40 billion some point. And it has also about $27 billion trade, bilateral trade. Yes, bilateral trade with China and Bangladesh, right? So Bangladesh is a very good recipient, although there is a fluctuation of money releasing about the Belt and Road, but it has been a steady trade partners with China. And India, for India, it is a bit problem because they would like to see Bangladesh as their territory and be able to call the diplomatic policy-making shots, right? So Bangladeshi media, however, it does not align with Indian media, and their view of Belt and Road is largely positive, but there's also some of the critical reflection, as you see in this Dhaka Tribune report. It says that geostrategic isolation won't help. Instead of isolation, they want to use or provocate government of Bangladesh to use Belt and Road Initiative as a bargaining chip against India and United States, and which is actually in practice happening, right? So I want to now point out towards the most recent decade of the conflict in which media geopolitics evolved into digital platform geopolitics. In the aftermath of the war in 2020, in the skirmish between India and China in 2020 April, they banned 112 Chinese apps, including financial transaction apps, heavily popular TikTok, as well as financial payment apps. But this is a part of a larger geopolitical alliance and counter-alliance building in which India itself is a space power, right? What is a computer or satellite? A satellite is a computer or a cell phone in the sky, in the space. So who gets to take that device to a space and the 5G connection or better connection than that? That's where the competition is happening. That's why Huawei is getting blocked with businesses, large part of our North American allies. But what is important here, you see that China is actually forging an alternative route, which was supposed to be done by BRICS. We know in 2014, BRICS cable was initiated, but it never materialized. It was supposed to be an alternative backbone to America and Europe-dominated internet infrastructures, globally speaking. But China is trying to build its own digital Silk Road, okay, including investments like data centers and space missions and fiber optics, in which you see some of them are visualized here. And that is also causing a problem from media representation side. So here's my summary of my overall work. What I found out that there are anti-Belt and Road Initiative sentiment in which it is a neocolonialism mechanism, it's a debt trap, it is a mechanism for bribery and corruption, and most of the narrative in pro-Belt and Road, they are actually a state propaganda. It is falling apart, failing, it's gonna shut down anytime soon, and it is a cultural influence mechanism. That's what the summary, if you do a discourse analysis of American and Indian media representation. But on the other side, if you take into consideration of Bangladesh, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and many, many other countries that we otherwise consider as authoritarian countries and not have transparent democracies or elections, you will see that there are government and finance-driven journalism working together to present Belt and Road Initiative as a collaboration, as an exchange, as a bilateral program, okay, not necessarily as a threat, but filling in critical infrastructures gap, including bridges, ports, data centers, and so on. It is important for balancing of power, right? And then it is a win-win negotiation between China and the other countries. Although India would heavily contest that. And in many cases, it is indeed not win-win. In long run, China will continue to benefit from the infrastructure that the global south is paying to build. Okay, but what is important is happening as a result of these infrastructures and trades and exchanges. There is a dialogue of cultures, right, in which we are getting a different kind of worldview than the Western dominated media view, or what you know from Noam Chomsky and Edward S. Herman's work, propaganda model, right, in which certain worldview is filtered and certain narrative is promoted. Belt and Road media coverage provides an opportunity to look at the world power shifts through a different lens. So that is my kind of conclusion, in which there are overlaps. Okay, there are media representation that is about overlaps, and that is an area where we can expand further regional media analysis, such as comparing South Asia to Middle East, comparing South Asia to Africa, Latin America, and I think North-South University here, with the presence of CSCSS, is perfectly positioned to advance that to BRICS countries, to BRICS economies, and its relationship to Bangladesh, and how communication and media representation is a large part of that. I want to thank you all again for your undivided attention and the gift of your time, and also thanks the organizer for organizing this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Harisur Rahman. It was quite an instructive presentation, and especially our students have learned a lot. I think you have already learned about China and how China actually, started its historical connection and network with South Asia. It was not like very recent phenomena. So just one takeaway is for media students, as you are here, and other students as well. So you might have heard, like, Stuart Hall has a theory called encoding decoding theory. Like, what media provides us, we do not take it for granted. Media tries us to, accept, like they try to intend some meaning to take it for granted, but we don't. So we negotiate, we oppose, and you have seen in different countries that media, they do not agree with the government. But in other countries, there might be media and government are like all together. They have nexus, they have connection. The ownership is very much politically motivated and all that. As he rightly mentioned, that in South Asia is very much diverse. And even in Bangladesh, I worked on like how public opinion actually are reflected on like BRI and all that. So there is no one path or the other. There is also middle path or in between that. Dr. Rahman showing that there is like negotiation that we also need to take into consideration, that BRI is bad or ugly or very good, but there is a middle path there. So without further ado, I now turn to our first discussion, Professor Tawfique M, who serves as the acting dean of the School of Humanities and Social Science at North-South University, and his role as director of SIPG and CSCSS. And I must say, without his cooperation and guidance, this CSCSS would not have been possible. And there would have been seminar on this issue, which is like quite, directive and instructive for all of us. So thank you, sir. You have like 10 minutes to discuss or reflect on his paper.
Thank you, Dr. Harris, and I'll be brief than 10 minutes. And first of all, thank you very much, Dr. Harisur Rahman, for a very comprehensive and thought-provoking, in-depth analysis. I think that this is so vast, the topic is, you could talk probably a few hours on this because you have done your PhD on this topic. I'm a little bit surprised that why Dr. Harris has chosen me and Dr. Nuruzzaman, two political scientists, for the discussion, because this is also a media discussion. It could be better to have someone from. Yeah, so maybe someone, because I can see few of our media communication faculty members are there. I'm sure they will add also their comments after the designated discussions kind of presentation. So I will be very, very short, and as I said that this is so comprehensive, I have not much to add with that, but I just want to raise some questions, what the researcher can think about for his future research. You talked about role of Indian media and its convergence and with the Western media, and your main argument that they are taking But I would also like to see it from a different point of view, like we can understand that the Indian media's analysis of BRI is coming from security lens. You also said that the national identity, nationalism, and all other things. But then my question is probably to you that for future research, that India's position as a kind of a emerging regional power is also been has a divergence position vis-a-vis to the other global competitor of the West, like Russia. So India is not in a way complying with all the positions that the West is taking against Russia. So in that case, Russia's position of India is many ways different. Whether it's voting in UN to buying Russian oil and other things. So why in Chinese case it is similar like West? So that might you need to think about that. And here comes that the tension between India China, that why this is so intense now. If you look into a few hundred years back, the India-China relationship was more or less like very neutral or complementary. If you look into the history, that and one of the reason probably was the geography, because even though India was never with China, China was never with India, but it was divided and with a big boundary of Himalaya. And because of the geography of Himalaya, there was not much kind of a communication, and also the ethnic diversity between the two regional kind of a big power. So we did not see any historical war and fight between India and China in history. There were some small kind of things were there. But now, because of the technology and globalization, we are seeing that India is facing or India is feeling being threatened by China. Somewhere China also is facing the same thing. So this you need to also probably consider when you will be looking into the India's position, that why India is so negative about BRI. Is it only because of the Western influence, or because that India has its own genuine reasons to become worried about the China's kind of a rise as a global power? And then it comes to my also kind of a question like the Chinese positioning of BRI, that how China has positioned in itself, the BRI in the global arena. If you look into the global media, you will be finding that even in the Chinese media, it is said that the China's BRI, the BRI is a China's kind of a brainchild, Chinese project, and other kind of a thing. If you look into the Western post World War kind of the post-colonial projects, you'll be finding that they could be very successful in making their institutions and projects universal rather than their own kind of naming. Like if you look into the UN, World Bank, WTO, IMF, we all can, the theoretical analysis that you have put through that, with that we can analyze that these all are basically supporting or fulfilling the purposes of the West. But we usually, generally, people do not see UN as a Western institution, WTO as a Western institution, because they were very successful of hiding this thing and creating as a universal institution for all humankind of the world. But China, in a way, rightly or wrongly, I don't know, intentionally or unintentionally, from the very beginning, they said that this is our kind of the initiative. And that's probably also made more easy for a media propaganda against Chinese kind of a thing. So that's one area that you can look into, that politics of creating narratives. And in the politics of creating narratives, West was more successful. India, as also a partner of West, they are also very successful. And also this media propaganda and the information war. Yes, we all understand this the right narratives or the wrong narratives, but in a war, there is no right and wrong strategy. So if you are in a war, in an information war, then there are shortcomings in the Chinese side of the narratives. If you look into the all propaganda in the media, you'll be finding that from Chinese side, there is a vacuum. And okay, there is a narratives, but where is the Chinese counter narratives? I don't see any Chinese counter narratives except their official positioning in the Chinese channels, and those are also seen as a state propaganda. China still couldn't make a Chinese CNN or Chinese Al Jazeera. We have Chinese media, but those are all seen as a kind of the Western, the state media kind of a thing. So I think there need to be also looked into the Chinese side of the shortcomings and limitations. Yes, there are lots of propaganda going on, but what did the China do against it? I didn't find much to be done there, and there are lots to be, lots can be done in that thing. Just think about this example of death trap. It was so successful as a concept. You can tell this classroom, the students, but if you go to the wider audience in Bangladesh and even Bangladesh policymakers, Bangladesh intellectuals, forget about Indians, all believe that there is a death trap. And it is not the truth, it's perception. So even whether it is right or wrong, but if people believe something, that is more important than the reality itself. So China could not make any counter narratives against the debt trap. All figures are there, as you said, that only 6% of the loan was from China, and rather than more was from World Bank and IMF. But then it was again. The campaign was very, very successful. And so my request would be to you to look into in your future research that what China can do to counter these narratives and come out with a kind of alternative arguments with this propaganda and other kind of the thing. My last point that I would like to put it here that BRICS. So the BRICS, as you rightly mentioned, that is an alternative platform now for the multipolar world. And there you will be seeing that the China and India are cooperating. So it's not all kind of a negativity and enmity, that India is cooperating with China in some places, is not cooperating or is not having a friendly relation in the other places. So we are seeing that world is heading towards a multipolar world where we are not living in any more unipolar world. So what role the India-China will have in a multipolar world, and especially the alternative institutions like Development Bank, Chinese, or Shanghai Cooperation Organization, or the different kind of the security. As you said, that we all understand very clearly that India-China relationship economically is also facing a struggle, but still China-India's trade volume is increasing every year, even after 2020, whenever they had this conflict. After that year also it has been increased. So it looks like that the economy has more power than this political and geopolitical kind of a thing. So there are possibility that there will be more this kind of the cooperation will be coming. And for Bangladesh, lastly, we are in a very favorable position in terms of Chinese investment, the BRI. I was informally talking with you that even though there are some concerns, but honestly speaking, in Bangladesh, the people's perception, there was some research being done, they're very favorable for China and its investment. People see that Chinese investment are more safer, more friendly. They are concerned about the Indian, and that happens that our closer neighbors are always our very good friends, and also sometimes love and hate relations are there. But China is not the closest neighbor, and that's why they are safe. And we think that, okay, so they are not problematic for us. But again, from the policy point of view, as we are also looking into the Bangladesh's interest in terms of future investment of Chinese and other regional countries in Bangladesh. And we think we need to come out with a very specific data, and we must have a data-driven policies for Bangladesh, whether it's Indian investment or Chinese investment, rather than being influenced by media and becoming sometimes sweeping or emotional kind of taking decisions. So with that note, I hope that we will have a fantastic future research, and we will have more cooperation in coming days. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. This has been quite out of the box. Like, had it been only media scholars, like in the discussion, then it would have been only very parochial media related. But we wanted to make it little further because we know everything is political. In other words, media is not apolitical. It has nexus with politics, economy, as sir was mentioning. So we are running out of time. So I would like to invite our second discussant, Professor Mohammed Nuruzzaman. Is based at the Department of Political Science and Sociology at North-South University, and he is also China expert, so vast publications and experience. So without further ado, sir, I invite you to have your perspective on this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Harris, for giving me the opportunity to speak here as another discussant. Before I start, I should actually appreciate Dr. Anis Rahman for his comprehensive presentation on the topic. He has in fact touched on everything, leaving very little for the discussants. By saying that, I start my discussion on this particular important issue. So I know that most of the participants in this room, attendants in this room, are actually students. So probably you are not familiar with BRI, BRICS, etc. In the future, you will be, of course, introduced to all these ideas, but I will also talk simply about these issues a little, so they get the gist, they get the ideas about the BRI and BRICS. So BRI is squarely a China show. It is totally managed, controlled by China. And it was launched back in the early 2010s, even before that, just soon after the 2008 global economic recession. China obviously played a very significant role in the 2008 global recession because America had no money to come up with to help the poor countries, developing countries in the global south particularly. So China became the obvious source of capital, investment and support. So BRI, it was actually pushed by another important development, and that was the Asia pivot policy of former American President Barack Obama. So Barack Obama wanted to contain China within the East Asian context. And because China already came up with the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, AIIB, back in 2008. So the American media, American policymakers soon sounded an alarm bell that China was actually coming to dominate the whole world. So China must be stopped from spreading its influence further. So, and also the Asian partnership, Asia Pacific Partnership, that was also launched, and China was not even invited to become a member of the APEP. So without any particular option to expand its economic economic influence, China thought that it should come up with an alternative project. And that alternative project is the BRI, Belt and Road Initiative. And China was given the opportunity to just expand its economic influence, business opportunities in Central Asia, Southeast Asia, and also gradually to Eastern European countries. So China actually got the poorest part of the world, in fact. And America was already controlling the whole world. Now the question is why America responded so negatively to the BRI and later BRICS. Number one reason is that since 1945, the US has been the hegemonic power, the dominant power in the world. It is controlling the United Nations Security Council. It is controlling the global financial monetary architecture, particularly the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. And China has a very weak presence in those areas, particularly in the IMF and the World Bank. So the Chinese government wanted to increase its influence because it already emerged as a very powerful economy in the world. So BRI became actually a project of choice for China. Now, with regard to the media presentations, I'm not an expert, but I think that I can say something about this issue. negative versus positive responses. So BRI, China got positive responses, media responses from particularly infrastructure. And after 2016, Bangladesh has actually developed some kind of a strategic partnership with China. Now, India is not really that much comfortable with our relations with China. Now, one thing is that if you notice, our relations with China and with India are both characterized by dangers and pitfalls. With India, we are surrounded from all sides. That's okay, geographic predicament. But in terms of trade, in terms of other interactions, we are nowhere close to India. There is a huge trade gap, and that is called the trade trap. And with China, the same picture. So Bangladesh imports some approximately $20 billion goods and items from China, and exports less than $1 billion. So it is 1 to 20. With India, it is 1 to 18. So who is our best friend then? In fact, no one, right? Because we are in a dependency trap with both powers. And we need to come out of this particular issue. Anyway, we have to plan our future. So that's about our relations with the two countries. But coming back to your presentation, Dr. Anis Rahman, I think that you should particularly highlight more with Bangladesh's position particularly, because we are benefiting definitely, but actually in a dependency trap. So that has to be addressed in any way. And another important issue is, we know about American capitalism, right? Or free market economy, individual-led entrepreneurship. It sounds very good, but we are not benefiting that much. We must compete with other powers in the world. Now, the Chinese, they have some kind of a different capitalism. It's called, quote unquote, socialistic capitalism. So capitalism can also be socialistic. But the question is how this socialistic capitalism managed by the Han Chinese is different from the American capitalism. American capitalism has been controlling the whole world. If China gets the opportunity, is it not going to do the same thing? If America is replaced in the next 5 years, 10 years by the Chinese, Han Chinese, in that case, they would actually design the world in their own image, power, and interest. So there is no doubt about that. So I should be concerned about this variety called the Han capitalism. So how they are actually going to deal with the whole world once the Americans really in a declining position. America is already in a declining position, in fact, in a declining position. But if China replaces America, how should the world look like? What should be the future of the whole world, particularly the poor countries in the world? I think we should think more seriously about this important issue. And with regard to Chinese response to European negative coverage, I think we need to have some kind of discussion on this particularly important issue. So Orientalism, as our speaker has already projected, is some kind of unequal power relationship between the European colonial powers and the colonized peoples in the third world countries, because they needed to justify their colonial domination. Now, how to justify that? That the Oriental people were irrational, illogical, they were barbaric people, they did not have any sense of civilization. So this was the situation at that time. So this actually allowed them to dominate the people in the Middle East, the people in Africa and other continents in the world. So the Chinese are actually coming up with some kind of response to that. And in last, I think, July, we were in Kunming, attending an international conference, and the Chinese presenters, they all rejected American concepts, particularly conceptual theoretical frameworks, apparatuses, and they tried to project their own ideas, own views on different international issues. I think they are actually coming up with some kind of different version of the world they would like to build in the future. And how many minutes I have? Okay, let me conclude. So students, I think we can talk about all these important issues in our class, but hope you got some ideas about all these important issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for your new perspectives. I think our researcher will definitely take care of those issues. So at this point, we normally what we do that after the presentation and thought-provoking discussion, we let it go to the audience. So at this point, I will just take questions from the audience first from this first circle. Then I'll come to the second circle. So from faculty members, and it's a student first, okay, from the first circle. Yes.
I have a class at 12:15. I'm leaving. Should see you.
So yes, নাম পরিচয় দিয়ে একটু বলতে হবে।
স্যার আমি শেখ মোস্তাফিজ, ডিপার্টমেন্ট অফ মিডিয়া কমিউনিকেশন জার্নালিজম। আমার প্রশ্নটি হচ্ছে স্যার মাতৃভাষায় করতে ভালোবাসি প্রশ্ন, কারণ কমফর্ট ফিল করি মাঝে মাঝে, সবসময় এত ভাষা দক্ষতা দেখাতে পছন্দ করি না। যাই হোক স্যার, আমার প্রশ্ন হচ্ছে যে আপনি যদি দেখেন বিশ্ব পরিমণ্ডলের রাজনীতি, সাউথ এশিয়া একটি বড় রোল প্লে করে একদম হোল রাজনীতিতে সারা বিশ্বের অ্যাক্রস দ্য গ্লোব। তখন চায়না যদি চায় যে এখানে তাদের একক আধিপত্য ধরে রাখবে, তাদের আমাদের এই সাউথ এশিয়ান সব কান্ট্রিগুলোকে নিয়েই তাদের এগোতে হবে। আমরা দেখি শুধু যে ভারতের সাথে তাদের বৈরিতা খুব লক্ষণীয়, কিন্তু এখন স্যার যে বিষয়টি হচ্ছে যে বেল্ট অ্যান্ড রোড ইনিশিয়েটিভ, যেটা 2013 সাল থেকে তাদের অলমোস্ট 12 ইয়ার্স, তো এটা থেকে আমরা কতটুকু বেনিফিট হতে পেরেছি এই পর্যন্ত, এবং ফিউচারে আমাদের কি থাকবে, এবং ব্রিক্স থেকে এটা কি একটা জিওপলিটিক্যাল টার্নওভার হবে কিনা, এটা তাদের চায়নার পক্ষে যাচ্ছে কিনা, এবং আমরা কি মানে চোরতারি ডাকাত আনতেছে কিনা, যে মার্কিন আধিপত্য তো আছেই, ওটার পরে আবার ব্রিক্সে যদি আবার অপারেশন সাপ্রেশন শুরু হয়।
Got your question, Mustafiz. Next.
Hello everyone, I am Kausar Alamin from Media Communication and Journalism Program. How does the BR influence the balance of power in South Asia? What do you think?
For next.
Assalamu alaikum. Hello everyone. I am Nur Mohammed, a student of Media Communication Journalism Program. So my question is very simple. What communication challenges will South Asian countries face when engaging with BRI, and how can they overcome them? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for enlightening us. Actually, I didn't have any intention to ask question, but our honorable speaker focus on BRI, especially the Bangladesh media's projection on BRI and India's projection. How do you see? In fact, a little bit historical context was shared here, why BRI was created. And now in these days, or in recent years, we see the Indo-Pacific strategy, IPS, has been created. And it is clearly mentioned even in the White House document that to counter BRI, Indo-Pacific strategy is created. And they have a slogan even that is rule-based international order. And how do you see, Bangladesh media's projection on IPS compared to BRI? This is one. And our esteemed colleague just shared, nobody's our friend, China and India. And actually, when I've done some research and I've been to China several times. So in terms of trade, he was right to say that the trade deficit we have with our two neighboring countries, with India and with China. But if you go and check in details, then you'll find that China actually provided almost 100% tax waiver to Bangladeshi products. And compared to China, how much is actually India is doing, you can check it. But the problem is, in my understanding, that is in our side, like how much products we are, or what kind of products we are actually exporting to China, and those have demands. And what our governments, our embassies are doing, that's a matter of question. Thank you.
Just 4 questions we have gotten from the third circle. So he is Dr. Joshi Ahmed, Associate Professor, Political Science Sociology. So you can respond to our student first, or either way, like from the last.
Thank you. These are great questions.
I
Thank
don't
you
have
so much.
Ahmed, just is
Sorry.
Joshimuddin, yeah.
Joshimuddin, sorry.
Thank you. These are great questions, and I'd like to respond in English because it is, I understand, being recorded for not just local but also international audience. But I recognize the importance of doing work in Bangla, and I feel ashamed that I haven't written a Bangla piece on Belt and Road. I should have had done that. So is Belt and Road going to be oppressive? Yes. Any developmental infrastructure, developmental projects are oppressive to its ethnic people or to its environment. So any development project comes with that environmental destruction. It's built into capitalist expansion that are top-down model work. And Joseph Escamper actually pointed out that it's called creative destruction. In order to expand spaces for capital, you have to destroy first what is there and then rebuild the infrastructures of capital movement. Marshall Plan in Europe was constructed on the surface of destroyed Europe, right? They did not do it on purpose for rebuilding it, but it happened. So yes, BRI is going to have oppressive nature. But the question is, do we shift blame to BRI alone for doing that? That's what the geopolitical image representation, soft power lacking game and politics is, right? So as you see that debt was accrued from IMF, World Bank, from Sri Lanka, but then why we are getting the blame to someone who has 6% debt from Sri Lanka? So we need to ask this kind of questions. We are in a better informed position when it comes to our own national decision making, as well as understanding international geopolitics and alliance. So that's my answer to the first question. I did mention that actually there is a 4 pages details analysis of Pakistani critical scholars' allegation against the Belt and Road, where they argued that is it going to aggravate the Baluchistan's people marginalization that you often see reflected by their occasional terrorist attacks against Chinese. And I think there were 4 occasions where they were also abducted, Chinese people, and some of them were murdered. So is it Balochistan then China is the main enemy? No, Balochistan has been struggling with that other nations and the hegemony of Punjabi people over all China, and as well as Urdu languages and Punjabi languages, against that for a long time. So protesting against Belt and Road is their way of telling the state government military nexus that you are not including us into new decision-making process. You have to include us. So that is a resistance against the top-down model of development, whereas China should have given more emphasis to bottom-up approaches, which it is beyond China's scope. And the government changes happen, then the Belt and Road initiative also gets squandered by that, right? So China is vulnerable to that. The initiatives and investments are vulnerable to that. The internal operation that is already in place, that is my focus. Second, is it going to balance global power? It is hard to really pinpoint yes or no. There are already elements of many countries. About 2/3 of the world is a part of the Belt and Road. About 40 million people has been affected financially by the investments of Belt and Road. In Bangladesh, there are about 30 projects. Worldwide, there are about 33,000 projects, and there are many of them are unfinished, many of them in progress, many of them have been completed. So we'll hear the success stories, we'll hear the negative stories, we'll hear the corruption stories. The point we have to find out then which story stands out and which other stories don't, right? So once you understand that nuance, we're in a position to actually understand, is it really going to be a good shift for global power balance? Okay, so third point was, what kind of challenges Belt and Road faces? Of course, it goes through many unstable economies and political regions where United States or IMF is reluctant to invest. China come forward to fill up that infrastructure gaps, but also it benefits China as a form of influence mechanism. That is not to hide. China's intention is to build that through collaboration. Behind the collaboration, there is diplomatic benefit. right? Of course. But what kind of challenges? Is it going to get the money back? That is a question, right? And second, the perception challenges, of course, there. It's irreconcilable. No matter what China does, it gets the blame for pre-existing problems in that country, like they did for Balochistan people, right? So the perception power, soft power, it is a constant challenge for Belt and Road Initiative. But of course, the main concern we should be vocal about is the environmental destruction, the displacement of peasant and farmer and indigenous people that were done by previously by IMF World Bank projects, ADB projects. Now it is being done by Belt and Road money. So we need to then contest that. Is China really offering an alternative developmental path, right? While being representing the interest of Communist Party. Okay, so fourth question was why Belt and Road was created. I think we did talk about that partly. I have also addressed that in my work. But in order to counter that, Dr. Jassim Ahmed pointed out, how do we see Bangladesh's media response to other projects too? Belt and Road, as I mentioned, is one of the signature, or let's say branding projects. China has been doing what the Belt and Road Initiative does long before the Belt and Road, parallel to Belt and Road, through Shanghai China Cooperative Mechanism, through Global Development Initiative, through many other. They have about 12 global scale projects ongoing in different names. But essentially, it's about Chinese trade and investments and Chinese exchanges, cultural, diplomatical, technological, so on. So if we then focus on that part, I think China is against, of course, the not only Western bias, but as Professor Tawfique mentioned, that there are legitimate concerns from India's point of view, security concern, right? From Bangladesh's point of view, is Bangladesh being played out against India, right? That could be a question. So we need to still then look at the long term in long scale of analysis. So my short scale analysis for last 5-6 years of media representation is not good enough to answer your question. We have to look at maybe 10 years duration of comparative work with much longer research assistance, probably supplied by North-South University.
Thank you. Just we have a couple of minutes, so you have last any pressing question? Couple of just yes, Kavit Siam, I guess.
Hello, sir. My name is Kavit Siam. I'm a media student from the in my second year. I would like to say lovely discussion, very engaging. My question is for Dr. Anis. You mentioned earlier on in your discussion that China does not want to be a hegemony. I would like to say I do not agree with that. In the last year, they published a new map that claimed disputed territories from all over Kashmir to Nepal, Bhutan, and even in the South China Sea, where they're crossing maritime spaces of Vietnam and the Philippines. So how would you, what would, in media representations, what would that communicate? Because they even had like strict national public service announcements that maps are a good way of conveying.
Yeah.
What's your question? Next. Yes.
হ্যালো, আসসালামু আলাইকুম। মাই নেম ইজ কৃতিতা নদী। আমার কোশ্চেন হচ্ছে, আমরা অলরেডি জানি যে ভারত আর চায়নার মধ্যে একটা বর্ডারিং প্রবলেম আছে ওদের। এখন এই বিআরআই প্রজেক্টের জন্য যদি বাংলাদেশ ভবিষ্যতে অনেক লাভবান হয়, সেক্ষেত্রে বাংলাদেশ এবং ইন্ডিয়ার যে ফ্রেন্ডশিপটা, এটার উপরে কোনো ইফেক্ট পড়বে কিনা? কিংবা আমরা জানি যে বাংলাদেশের 70% বর্ডার লাইন হচ্ছে ইন্ডিয়ার, সেক্ষেত্রে বাংলাদেশ কোনো ডেঞ্জারাস পজিশনে আছে কিনা?
Okay. We've gotten a couple of questions. Oh, yes, another member, Dr. Abdullah. Yes.
Thank you. Wonderful presentation. My direct question to the speaker particularly, as you know that if we compare between China and America, from the cultural and also social aspect, people living in this part of the world still have observation, the public perception, trust, and believe in China and believe in, America. People have more trust on America than Chinese. I'm talking about from cultural and social perspective, not talking about the economy. So how that can be changed through, as you mentioned, like one of the terminology used, sinological Orientalism. Do you think that can be change this public perception? Because this is very popular and dominant perception. Thank you.
Thank you.
Counter hegemony or reverse hegemony, right?
Can I respond to that?
Yeah, that's three questions.
Yes,
So
I
we are
will-
more.
Yes.
Okay, please add it.
Yes, it's our professor. Okay.
Hello, I am Dr. Ziaul Adnan, Associate Professor, Management Department. My question is that what is the payoff plan or payoff plan? That means how Bangladesh would pay off the loan or the investment. Can we directly link the investment with foreign currency earning based businesses? Because if the development improve the local business, it does not give us foreign currency. How we can link the foreign currency export with that investment so that we could be able to pay off the loan and the other investment?
Thank you. Okay, so I'll quickly answer this. So these are, I think, really great questions. I have had these questions before I published that work, but of course I can publish more. So first question, does China want to be a global hegemony? So in Western media lens, they do. From Western point of view, China wants to replace United States as number one. But we need to be in mind that in world system theory, there is not necessarily one core country. There are multiple core countries on top of which there is one on the top, right? And when there is a new world system comes in, it doesn't mean the previous number one is disappearing. They coexist side by side. So one example I'll give of United Kingdom. Right, so it was number one for 200-300 years. Has it disappeared? No, it is still one of the important power sources for global north, right? Side by side United States. So if China rises, that doesn't mean America has to take place of sub 7 or 8. It can be number 2 and they can work together. But does China want it? And how do we visualize that? I also look at one map that I use it in my class, but I don't have time to show it here. United States has 840 military bases all over the world. Can you tell me how many Chinese bases are there, military bases?
Sir, I think 1 or 2.
One in Djibouti, which is a part of their Belt and Road maritime route, and that is there to protect their traffic route against the sea loads. You know, that's a big problem on that part of the world, both for the West and Chinese shipping routes. So from looking at the military point of view, China doesn't appear to be taking over the United States so soon, even if it wants to, right? It doesn't have the military investment comparable. In fact, if you combine all Russian, Chinese, and European money, it is not even equivalent to American money, how much they invest on military. Right? Although China is number 2nd or 3rd right next to Russia, right, in terms of military investment, but that statistic is not representative of the true difference or gap in terms of investment. So that is one of the things. And the Chinese government narrative, they don't really want to overtake United States. You'll see that Chinese people are barred from entering International Space Station. About 219 people from 19 countries in the world stepped inside International Space Station, the most true international forum outside the world, right, in the space. Why there is no Chinese national? It is because in 2011, Wolf Amendment Act passed in the Congress in the United States, they barred any Chinese nationals to do trade or business or agreement with NASA and Science Office. That's why they cannot take Chinese people in there. So, but Chinese narrative, on the other hand, when they gave the interview, I had a slide of, in my slide, there was an image of CNN interviewing Chinese space agency astronauts. They said, we want to have access there. We want to collaborate with the United States for bigger peaceful mission in space. We are not here to take over their space. And frankly speaking, to be number one, you have to maintain this 840 bases, military bases all over the world, and a couple of war going on right now. See how United States is struggling to fund Ukraine. Well, which nation in the world would like to be put position in that position where in order to fund a war outside, where you have nothing to do, nationally speaking, ethnically speaking, but at the expense of your own government money, where they're facing shutdown, government shutdown, right? So China has long-term visions in contingency plans not to commit the same problem that the United States has done. That's why you see their reluctance in stepping into wars, right? They cautiously avoid that kind of direct involvement, such as with the relationship with Iran. So the second question, does BRI problematizes India-Bangladesh relationship? Of course it does. It's a big headache for India. Symbolically speaking, culturally speaking, India would like to see Bangladesh as their own, within their own sphere of influence, right? And legitimately so, because we share the border such a long time, we have such a long shared history in contrast to Chinese-Bangladesh relationship. So they had this legitimate concern, but I would say also look into, in the last 14 years, in the under current government's regime, and it's a bit politically controversial to make that claim, how much influence India has already asserted inside Bangladesh through politics. So that is their counter, right? They would allow certain investment. For example, Nepal has taken investment for building dams, but they have to do that against Indian government's will. So they showed that courage to do that because they have problematic relationship with India, whereas Bangladesh would like to maintain, they would pretend to be not annoying India, but still go on to force the relationship with China. So I would say the current government is very successful in maintaining that diplomatic faces without directly causing an irritation that becomes a news headline. So that's my response to your question. The final two questions. China will always have the problem of trust from people as long as the United States has an anti-Chinese propaganda mechanism all over the world and within our mindset. That's what we also write in our paper, right? We often reproduce this sinological worldview knowingly, unknowingly, without scrutinizing the claims. We have to be educated or literate ourselves more about that, but that is a genuine challenge that China cannot really undo overnight the perception that it has, the Western media as well as Indian media has built against China. So China has to invest a lot more money and build a lot more intellectual collaboration and bridges and global South. And China is actually doing that. There are many academic exchanges going on, and China don't always advertise those. We see that after the effect takes place, right? So think about the center that is hosting this talk, why it is here, right? So those kind of mechanisms are growing, but I cannot say they're good enough to really overturn the narrative. So finally, what is the payoff plan? I think it's a complex financial questions, but one thing I can say for sure, that Belt and Road exchanges, it problematizes United States dollar hegemony. And that is one of their concern, that the more countries become part of Belt and Road or does trade with China and pay in their local currency or Chinese currency, that is less US dollar being used. But there are projections about that. The hype around seeing that as a threat is overblown. China, United States is still doing the business in dollar. So as long as with China, US trade is the world's biggest trade, right? As long that is in dollar, then we don't have to. The volume is so large, trillion dollars. You don't have to worry about a couple of $1 million or even $1 billion being traded in ruble. But it does indicate that power has shifted at the local level, but not the critical mass is not big enough or heavy enough to undo or change the United States dollar hegemony in next 22 decades until there is a third world war that re-stabilizes the world system again for the third time since the European Renaissance. I'll stop here and thank you for letting me clarify all these excellent questions.
I think thank you very much, Dr. Harisur Rahman. It was very stimulating discussion and we have learned a lot from the overall session, but I know you guys are running out of patience, so we'll let you go within a minute. You have like refreshment outside, so student, you take the, yes. Yeah, and faculty members, please join us at SIPG conference room, NAC building level 10. But before that, those who are interested, please join us to have a group photo session here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.